John Deere's Ottumwa facility will be closed for about a month as the company reevaluates customer demand.
Farmers across the country, once loyal to the John Deere brand, are now turning their backs in record numbers. Why? Because John Deere is pulling jobs out of America and locking farmers out of their own equipment. This is more than just a corporate decision. It's a crisis that could change the future of American farming, push small farmers to the brink, and open the door for foreign competitors to take over the industry. And now, politicians, investors, and even everyday consumers are picking sides. So, what led John Deere to make this shocking move? How are farmers fighting back? And could this be the beginning of the end for the most iconic name in American agriculture? Let's break it all down. What's happening? For years, John Deere had promoted itself as a company deeply rooted in American manufacturing. The idea of shifting jobs abroad seemed unthinkable, especially at a time when domestic production was being encouraged through incentives and tariffs designed to protect U.S. workers. However, the reality of global business pressures had forced John Deere to make a decision that many saw as a betrayal. Workers in Deere's U.S. plants were hit the hardest. Thousands of employees had dedicated their careers to the company, trusting that their jobs were secure. Now, entire communities that relied on John Deere as an economic anchor faced uncertainty. For farmers, the move sparked fears of price increases, supply chain disruptions, and questions about the future of their equipment. The controversy ignited national debate. Was John Deere's decision a necessary step for staying competitive, or was it a corporate maneuver that put profits above people? To understand the answer, it is essential to examine what drove the company to make such a drastic move. The move stunned the nation, but the question remained. Why did John Deere feel compelled to take such a risk? Understanding the rationale. At first glance, John Deere's shift to Mexico seemed like a straightforward case of corporate outsourcing. However, the reasons behind the decision were far more complex. Several key factors influenced the company's move, including rising production costs, supply chain struggles, and an increasingly competitive global market. One of the most pressing issues was the skyrocketing cost of manufacturing in the United States. Inflation had driven up wages, raw material prices, and operational expenses, making it harder for companies like John Deere to maintain profitability without making drastic adjustments. While the company remained profitable, its leadership faced increasing pressure from investors to reduce costs and maximize efficiency. Supply chain disruptions also played a major role. Over the past few years, the agricultural equipment industry had been plagued by shortages of essential components like microchips, steel, and high-tech sensors. Many of these components were sourced from overseas, and delays had made it difficult for Deere to keep production on schedule. By moving some operations closer to its supply sources in Mexico, the company hoped to streamline production and reduce costly delays. Another factor was the shift toward electric and autonomous machinery. Deere had been investing heavily in automation, artificial intelligence, and next-generation farming technology. Scaling production for these innovations required a cost-effective approach, and Mexico provided a more affordable manufacturing base. As the economic rationale became clearer, the backlash began to escalate. Leading the charge was none other than President Donald Trump. Political backlash and immediate response. John Deere's announcement rapidly ignited a political controversy, with President Donald Trump emerging as one of its most outspoken critics. Even speaking at a rally filled with supporters, he made no effort to soften his disapproval. John Deere is turning its back on the American worker, he declared. They built their brand right here in America, and now they want to send our jobs to Mexico. That is not going to happen under my watch. Trump's warning was not just political theater. He vowed to take action, floating the idea of imposing hefty tariffs on John Deere equipment manufactured in Mexico and imported back into the United States. Similar strategies had been used in the past to pressure companies into keeping jobs stateside, particularly in the automotive and steel industries. If enacted, such tariffs could make Deere's decision far less financially viable. Republican lawmakers quickly echoed Trump's outrage, calling for economic penalties against companies that outsourced manufacturing. Meanwhile, Democratic leaders focused on the broader issue of corporate responsibility, questioning why companies were still choosing to move jobs abroad despite policies meant to encourage domestic production. Union leaders, particularly from the United Auto Workers, also voiced strong opposition. The UAW, which represents thousands of John Deere employees, condemned the decision and began organizing protests. Factory workers feared that not only would jobs be lost, but that those remaining in the U.S. would be subjected to lower wages and weaker bargaining power. As the political battle heated up, the next phase of this battle would bring even greater stakes for John Deere, the U.S. economy, and the global agricultural industry. The right to repair movement. For generations, American farmers prided themselves on their self-reliance. When their tractors broke down, they rolled up their sleeves, got their hands dirty, and fixed the problem themselves. But in recent years, that independence has been stripped away. John Deere, once considered the gold standard of farming equipment, had implemented strict software locks and proprietary diagnostic tools that made it nearly impossible for farmers to repair their own machinery. This growing frustration ignited the right to repair movement, a nationwide pushback against corporations that restrict consumers from fixing their own products. What began as a quiet rebellion among a handful of farmers soon exploded into a full-blown movement, gaining traction not just in agriculture, but in industries ranging from consumer electronics to medical devices. The problem stemmed from John Deere's increasingly complex machinery. Modern tractors were no longer just mechanical workhorses. They were packed with sensors, computer chips, and proprietary software that controlled nearly every function. If a machine broke down, even for something as simple as a faulty sensor, the only way to fix it was through an authorized John Deere technician. Farmers couldn't access diagnostic tools, order replacement parts, or make their own repairs without risking a voided warranty or an inoperable machine. For many farmers, this felt like corporate extortion. They had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on equipment, yet they didn't truly own it. Instead, they were locked into an expensive cycle of dealer-controlled maintenance, often facing weeks-long delays and exorbitant service fees. The frustration reached a boiling point. Farmers organized protests, wrote letters to lawmakers, and testified before state legislatures. Advocacy groups like the U.S. Public Interest Research Group and the National Farmers Union amplified their voices, arguing that John Deere's policies were anti-competitive and harmful to rural America. As the right to repair movement gained momentum, it attracted bipartisan political support. While some lawmakers framed it as a fight for free market competition, others saw it as a workers' rights issue, giving farmers the basic ability to maintain their own tools. Meanwhile, major tech companies, fearing similar regulations, began lobbying against repair-friendly legislation, escalating the battle into a nationwide political showdown. While the right to repair movement grew stronger, the economic strain on small farms was becoming unbearable. The cost of keeping John Deere equipment running was pushing many farmers to the edge of financial ruin. Economic strain on small farms. For small farmers, the impact of John Deere's repair policies wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a financial crisis. In an industry where profit margins were already razor-thin, being forced to rely on expensive proprietary repairs meant many farms were bleeding money. Every breakdown came at a cost. When a tractor sat idle waiting for an authorized repair, farmers weren't just paying for parts and labor, they were losing valuable time. A single delay during planting or harvesting season could mean the difference between a profitable year and devastating losses. For some, the numbers simply didn't add up anymore. The cost of maintaining a single high-tech tractor could exceed $10,000 per year, and with many farms relying on multiple machines, the expenses piled up fast. Farmers who had once counted on John Deere as a reliable partner now saw the company as an unaffordable burden. Worse still, many of these farms had taken out loans to buy their equipment. As interest rates climbed and commodity prices fluctuated, farmers found themselves caught in a vicious cycle, saddled with debt while facing mounting repair costs. Desperation led to tough choices. Some farmers downgraded to older, less efficient models that they could still repair themselves. Others sold off their John Deere machinery entirely, shifting to competitors that allowed for more flexible maintenance. But for many, these weren't real solutions. Farming had become increasingly technology-driven, and stepping away from modern equipment meant falling behind. For those who couldn't afford to make the switch, the only option left was to fight back legally. The economic pressure forced farmers to take drastic action. Instead of simply protesting, they turned to the courts, launching lawsuits that accused John Deere of monopolistic control over the repair market. Legal battles and advocacy. With their livelihoods at stake, farmers across the country decided to take the fight to court. The lawsuits against John Deere centered around anti-competitive practices, alleging that the company had created a monopoly in the agricultural repair market by blocking third-party mechanics and limiting consumer access to essential repair tools. The legal battle wasn't just about tractors. It was about whether a company could control what customers did with products they purchased. Farmers argued that once they bought a machine, they should have the right to fix it on their own terms. But John Deere's policies meant they were locked into a system of forced dependency, unable to even diagnose problems without the company's approval. One of the landmark cases was filed in 2022 by a coalition of farmers and advocacy groups, accusing John Deere of violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. The lawsuit claimed that Deere's refusal to provide diagnostic tools and repair access had stifled competition, driven up costs, and harmed consumers. Meanwhile, state governments began taking action. Colorado became the first state to pass right-to-repair legislation specifically for agricultural equipment in 2023, requiring John Deere and other manufacturers to provide farmers with the software and tools needed to fix their own machines. Other states, including New York, Minnesota, and Massachusetts, soon followed suit with their own proposed laws. In response, John Deere pushed back hard. The company spent millions lobbying against right-to-repair legislation, arguing that allowing independent repairs would pose cybersecurity risks and undermine intellectual property protections. Deere executives warned that unauthorized repairs could lead to faulty machinery and safety hazards, putting both farmers and the food supply at risk. But for many farmers, these arguments fell flat. The real issue wasn't cybersecurity, it was corporate greed, and as more states introduced repair-friendly legislation, the tide seemed to be turning. With legal battles mounting and lawmakers stepping in, John Deere faced a new challenge. Farmers were no longer willing to remain loyal to a company that no longer served them. Shifting loyalties. The biggest shift was toward competitor brands that embraced repair-friendly policies. Companies like Kubota, AGCO, and Case IH began aggressively marketing themselves as farmer-friendly alternatives, offering open repair access and lower maintenance costs. Kubota, in particular, gained ground by offering equipment that was simpler to maintain and came with fewer digital restrictions. AGCO's Massey Ferguson line attracted smaller farms with more affordable pricing and accessible repair tools. Meanwhile, Case IH capitalized on Deere's declining reputation by emphasizing its commitment to independent mechanics. Some farmers even turned to imported equipment. Tractors from European and Asian manufacturers, especially those from China and South Korea, began making inroads into the U.S. market, providing cheaper, easily repairable alternatives. For John Deere, the consequences were immediate. Dealerships reported declining sales, with more farmers opting for second-hand models or alternative brands. While Deere still dominated the market, cracks were forming in its once unshakable customer base. Even longtime loyalists found themselves reconsidering their options. "I have driven John Deere my entire life," one farmer told a news outlet. "But if they won't let me fix my own tractor, why should I keep giving them my business?" The answer was becoming clear. Unless John Deere changed its approach, it risked permanently losing its grip on American farming. With the farming community turning against John Deere, the company faced a stark choice: adapt to the demands of its customers or risk a slow, painful decline. But as the battle continued, a new player entered the fight. Political leaders looking to use the controversy to their advantage. China's strategic maneuvers. As John Deere's restructuring sent shockwaves through American agriculture, China saw an opening. Chinese agricultural equipment manufacturers had already been expanding aggressively in developing markets, and now they had their eyes on North America. By investing in Mexico's growing industrial sector, China was not only positioning itself as a supplier of affordable agricultural machinery, but also gaining a strategic foothold just south of the U.S. border. China's government-backed manufacturing giants, such as YTO Group and Zoomlion, began increasing their presence in Mexico, setting up partnerships and production facilities. These companies were producing tractors, harvesters, and other farming equipment at prices significantly lower than those of American manufacturers. By operating out of Mexico, they could take advantage of lower labor costs, while also gaining access to trade agreements that allowed for easier exports into the United States. The implications of this move were enormous. If Chinese-made agricultural equipment could enter the U.S. market through Mexico, it would allow China to bypass many of the trade restrictions imposed directly on its exports. This raised concerns in Washington, where policymakers warned that China's growing influence over Mexico's industrial sector could weaken America's ability to control its own manufacturing base. But for farmers struggling with high equipment costs, the presence of cheaper alternatives was tempting. With John Deere and other American brands becoming increasingly expensive, many began to look toward more affordable Chinese models. Some U.S. dealers even started importing Chinese-made tractors, despite concerns over quality and durability. China's strategy was clear: establish a stronghold in Mexico, flood the market with affordable machinery, and gradually erode the dominance of American agricultural manufacturers. The question was, could the U.S. do anything to stop it? While China pushed forward with its aggressive expansion, another rising power was quietly reshaping the global agricultural machinery industry: India. India's emerging role. While much of the world's attention was focused on China's manufacturing capabilities, India had been steadily building its own agricultural machinery industry. Indian companies like Mahindra and Sonalika were rapidly gaining ground, producing tractors and farming equipment at a fraction of the cost of Western brands. Mahindra, already the world's largest tractor manufacturer by volume, was aggressively expanding its global footprint. Its success came from a simple yet powerful strategy: affordability without sacrificing durability. Unlike John Deere's expensive models, Mahindra's tractors were designed for cost-conscious farmers who needed reliable equipment without excessive maintenance costs. In the United States, Mahindra was gaining a reputation as a strong competitor to Dere. More farmers were drawn to its lower prices and ease of repair, avoiding the expensive software-locked machinery that had become a hallmark of John Deere's newer models. Mahindra also capitalized on the frustrations surrounding Deere's restrictive repair policies by ensuring that its tractors could be serviced easily by independent mechanics. India's rise in the global agricultural machinery market also aligned with its broader ambitions. With a massive domestic agricultural sector, India had developed expertise in producing affordable yet efficient farming equipment. As labor costs in China increased, India positioned itself as an alternative hub for agricultural machinery manufacturing, attracting investment from global players looking for lower production costs. If Mahindra and other Indian manufacturers continued their rapid growth, they could challenge not only John Deere, but also the entire traditional structure of agricultural equipment supply chains. Could India's affordable tractors become the preferred choice for U.S. farmers looking for budget-friendly alternatives? With China, Japan, South Korea, and India all making strategic moves, the global balance of power in agricultural manufacturing was shifting. But what would this mean for the future of American industry? The global power shift. The agricultural machinery market had long been dominated by Western manufacturers, with American and European brands setting the standard for quality and innovation. But the rise of new global competitors signaled a potential realignment of industry leadership, with China establishing a foothold in Mexico, Japan and South Korea expanding their presence in the U.S., and India offering an affordable alternative. The dominance of American agricultural equipment was being called into question. If these trends continued, traditional market leaders like John Deere, Case IH, and New Holland could see their influence erode. The implications of this shift went beyond just manufacturing. If China's presence in Mexico expanded, it could give Beijing increased leverage over the North American agricultural market. If India's tractor exports continued to grow, it could reshape the global supply chain, making Indian machinery a staple in American fields. And if South Korea and Japan strengthened their position in the U.S., it could redefine consumer preferences in the agricultural sector. At the heart of this transformation was a fundamental question: could American manufacturers adapt, or would they be left behind in a rapidly changing global market? If companies like John Deere failed to respond to these new threats, they risked losing not only their market share, but also their status as leaders in agricultural innovation. The coming years would determine whether the United States could reclaim its industrial leadership, or if the global power shift in agricultural manufacturing would become permanent. As John Deere struggled to navigate this landscape, the world watched closely, waiting to see how America's most iconic farming brand would respond to the challenge. With these global forces reshaping agriculture, attention turned to the role of government intervention and policy reform. Policy reforms and government intervention. With growing concerns over corporate control, outsourcing, and technological monopolies, policymakers began discussing legislative solutions. The debate centered on two critical issues: how to protect American manufacturing jobs, and how to ensure that farmers had fair access to repair and maintain their own equipment. One of the most high-profile proposals was the Right to Repair Act, which aimed to force manufacturers like John Deere to provide farmers with full access to diagnostic tools, software, and spare parts. Supporters argued that this would level the playing field, giving farmers the ability to maintain their machinery without being locked into expensive service agreements. However, Deere and other major equipment manufacturers lobbied aggressively against the bill, claiming that unrestricted access to proprietary software could lead to cybersecurity risks and compromise machine performance. At the same time, legislators debated economic incentives to keep manufacturing jobs in the United States. With companies like John Deere shifting production to Mexico, there was renewed interest in reshoring policies, including tax breaks for companies that built factories domestically and penalties for those that outsourced jobs. However, implementing these policies was not straightforward. Many manufacturers claimed that U.S.-based production was simply too expensive to remain competitive on a global scale. Trade policies also played a significant role. Some lawmakers pushed for tariffs on foreign-made agricultural equipment to encourage domestic manufacturing, while others argued that increased trade restrictions would only raise costs for farmers who needed affordable machinery. Beyond equipment manufacturing, policymakers explored broader reforms to support the agricultural industry as a whole. Proposals included increased subsidies for small and mid-sized farms, investments in sustainable farming practices, and expanded research funding for innovative agricultural technologies. Despite widespread agreement that something needed to change, political gridlock made progress slow. Lobbyists for both corporate and independent farming interests fought to shape legislation in their favor, leading to drawn-out debates and conflicting priorities. While government intervention remained uncertain, farmers were not waiting for policymakers to solve their problems. In response to rising costs and corporate consolidation, many took matters into their own hands. Farmer-led initiatives. As frustration with John Deere and other large agricultural corporations grew, farmers began seeking alternative solutions. Across the country, a new wave of cooperatives and community-based initiatives emerged, designed to reduce reliance on major manufacturers and increase local control over farming operations. One of the most promising developments was the rise of farmer-owned equipment cooperatives. Instead of each farmer purchasing expensive machinery outright, groups of farmers pooled their resources to buy and share tractors, harvesters, and other essential equipment. This allowed small-scale farmers to access high-tech machinery without taking on unsustainable debt. In addition to equipment sharing, some farmers turned to independent repair networks. These grassroots efforts connected farmers with mechanics and engineers who specialized in modifying and repairing John Deere machinery without relying on factory-authorized parts. Online forums and social media groups became hubs for sharing repair guides, software hacks, and alternative part suppliers. Beyond equipment concerns, farmers also sought ways to reclaim control over their supply chains. Direct-to-consumer farming gained momentum, with more farmers bypassing traditional distributors and selling their products through local markets, subscription-based produce boxes, and online platforms. This model not only increased profits for farmers, but also strengthened relationships between producers and consumers. Sustainability-focused farmers experimented with regenerative agriculture, which emphasized soil health, crop diversity, and reduced dependence on chemical inputs. By investing in these long-term farming strategies, some farmers hope to protect themselves from the financial volatility caused by corporate price controls and trade disruptions. With the agricultural industry at a crossroads, the question became clear: what would the future of farming look like? Would these grassroots movements grow strong enough to reshape the industry? Or would corporate interests and technological monopolies tighten their grip? Envisioning the future. As the dust settled on John Deere's controversial decision and the subsequent industry shifts, the broader implications for American agriculture came into focus. The battle over manufacturing, repair rights, and corporate influence was not just about one company. It was about the fundamental structure of the farming economy. In one possible future, John Deere and its competitors adapt to farmer demands, embracing open-source technology and flexible repair policies. This scenario would see manufacturers working alongside farmers rather than controlling them, fostering a more balanced relationship between technology providers and producers. Another possibility is a further shift toward automation in corporate farming, where the industry becomes increasingly dominated by large agribusinesses that use AI-driven machinery and data analytics to maximize efficiency. In this scenario, small and mid-sized farmers might struggle to compete, leading to further consolidation and loss of independence. Alternatively, if farmer-led initiatives continue to grow, the agricultural sector could undergo a grassroots transformation. Community cooperatives, alternative supply chains, and local food networks might challenge corporate dominance, leading to a more decentralized and resilient farming economy. Ultimately, the future of American agriculture will be shaped by a combination of technology, policy decisions, and the choices made by farmers themselves. The battle between corporate interests and independent farmers is far from over, and the coming years will determine whether traditional farming communities can survive in a rapidly changing economic landscape. The battle over farming's future is just beginning. Will corporate giants like John Deere change their ways, or will farmers be forced to find their own solutions? What do you think is the best path forward for American agriculture? Let us know in the comments below.